Hey friends, welcome to the Taking Your Next Step podcast from Collegians for Christ. Through each episode, we will journey together focusing on becoming better followers of Jesus. If you are eager, like I am, to follow Jesus Christ, then take your next step now by joining us in today's episode. Welcome to this week of our podcast episodes on this Tuesday and Thursday. And we've been walking through really slow about how to cut the busyness out of our lives. We've identified that busyness and distractions are maybe what are our greatest spiritual enemy. And so we've been walking through very slowly about different ways, ideas, practices that you and I can implement in our lives so that we can be more with Jesus. Because we want to do what? We want to be with Jesus so that we can become like Jesus with the ultimate goal of living like Jesus. And so on this episode, I want to talk about this idea of what about the Sabbath? When we think about the Sabbath, you may already think, okay, well, you're talking about the Sabbath, but that was something for the Old Testament. That was something for the Jews, their traditional, the law that they were given. Does that even have any application to a believer's life in 2022? And I want to talk about that in detail here. Now, we understand the church is not under Jewish law. The church is not under that law to keep a Sabbath Saturday. Upon the resurrection of Jesus Christ, the church incorporated what we would refer to as the Lord's Day. We understand it's the first day of the week on our calendar, Sunday, and we identified that day as a day of rest and a day of worship. So that means the Sabbath is completely null and void, right? Well, I want to hold off on that just for a minute. Now, while we're not bound to the Saturday Sabbath in law, I believe there's a tremendous principle that you and I as Christians in 2022 are missing, and therefore we are suffering as a result. You say, what do you mean we're suffering? We're suffering from this physical exhaustion. We're suffering from a restlessness that we can't quite move through. We're suffering from fatigue, both physically and mentally. We're suffering from depression, stress, and we're suffering from all these things that are causing us ultimately to suffer spiritually. So let's talk about this idea of the Sabbath and the principle of taking a day off. And let's consider even further if Sunday is really even a day off, or if the church allows for a day off and a day of rest, or if it places demands on pastors, staff, members that could possibly make it even harder to get a physical day of rest in order to be spiritually healthy people. Now, before we walk through this episode and Thursdays, I want to be very clear. I'm not saying that we are bound or need to keep the Sabbath as a law. I'm saying there is a principle I find in Scripture and have seen in my own life that I believe we can apply to our lives that could be very beneficial. Now, when we hear the word Sabbath, what does it mean? It literally means this: to stop. To stop what? To stop going. To stop working, to stop wanting, to stop worrying, to stop buying, just to stop. You see, our culture is 24/7 everything. And so this is a hard discipline to practice. We understand Sunday is our day as believers to set aside to worship the Lord and to rest. But as I look into our church culture and I look into culture as a whole, many times Sunday is just this. It's just another day. It's just another 24 out of the 7, 24 hours out of that 7 days a week that is just busy. It's filled with stuff. And I find myself and I find other people coming up just spiritually empty, because the discipline or the principle of the Sabbath is not being practiced. Now, we just want to consider a couple thoughts with you as we walk through this, and I pray it'll be a great help to you. We want to think about this, that the Sabbath was made for man. Jesus got in a lot of trouble because he kept being accused of breaking the Sabbath. Now, we understood Jesus obviously celebrated the Sabbath, but the religious Pharisees kept accusing him in his activities that he was breaking the Sabbath. Now, this was an issue that the religious rulers had because of this. They had added too many exact, precise rules to the Sabbath that had actually made it more of a burden. It made it something that was hard to keep rather than a day to enjoy. And so they had messed it all up. And so Jesus calls them out on that tremendously. Now, I can remember years back, I had the opportunity to go to Israel. And on a Saturday, I remember I was in a hotel. I stepped on the elevator, the doors open, and I realized after about a minute or two, something's wrong with this elevator. I was trying to go down. The elevator was going up, and I was pushing buttons, but it was doing nothing. And what it was doing is it was stopping on every floor and opening the doors, waiting, closing the doors, going to the next floor, opening the doors, closing the doors. What was that for? That was for the Jewish people that practiced the Sabbath, in order for them not to have to push the button on the elevator. They could walk on, they could do other things, but to work to push that button may cause them to break the Sabbath. And so that was strange to me, but that's what Jesus is referring to. He said in Matthew 23:4, talking about the Pharisees, he says, "For they bind heavy burdens and grievous to be borne and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers." So Jesus was saying, look, these religious leaders are adding so much to what God is giving. It's not so much that the Sabbath was this day of requirement, but it was a day that God gave as a gift to the people, and they had flipped it around. So Jesus did not break the Sabbath as God had given it as we go through Scripture, but rather he broke their man-made tradition, and this made them very angry. You see, Jesus would heal on the Sabbath day. He would help someone. He said, hey, if you had even an animal to fall off or to go out, would you not go find it on the Sabbath day? Absolutely, you should. If you're to follow the law completely through, we are to love others as ourselves, and so we have to help. And then he traveled on the Sabbath, he talked with people, he worshiped on the Sabbath. So Jesus dealt with these Pharisees numerous times, and he worked to correct their view of the Sabbath. One passage of Scripture here is, I'm just trying to lay some foundation here briefly before we go into a little more practical aspect. But he dealt with them in Mark chapter number 2. Early on in his ministry, we see Jesus out doing things. He's with the disciples, and it says this in verse 23, "And it came to pass that he went through the cornfields on the Sabbath day. And his disciples began as they went to pluck the ears of corn. And here the Pharisees are. They said unto him, Behold, why do they on the Sabbath day that which is not lawful? And he said unto them, Have you never read what David did? When he had need and was a-hungered, he and they that were with him, he went into the house of God in the days of Abiathar the high priest, and did eat the showbread, which is not lawful to eat but for the priest, and gave also to them which were with him." And he makes this powerful statement, and he said unto them, "The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath." Then he goes on to say, "Therefore the Son of Man is Lord also of the Sabbath." So he said, guys, you've got it backwards. You've got the cart before the horse. The Sabbath was made for man. It wasn't man for the Sabbath. It wasn't man that needed to rule the Sabbath. The Sabbath was a gift to man. It was honestly a very big need for man. So think with me about this. If God created the Sabbath for man, then man must need it. So if God created this day that was very important and he gifted it to man, then man must truly need it. You see, God created everything that we know. And then the great creator of the universe did what on the seventh day? He rested. The creator of the universe rested for a day, and in doing so, he established this great principle or example for creation to follow. You see, God created or designed a day of rest for us. This Sabbath, or this day to stop, is a day to enjoy something from the Creator. Yet these religious Pharisees had began to put into practice heavy burdens, like what should I do? What shouldn't I do? Is this okay to do? This okay to do? Is somebody going to be looking on my shoulder? Am I going to disappoint God? They had gotten it all wrong. It was not something to, per se, tit for tat to keep. It was something given to enjoy. It was a day of rest. What was the purpose of it? When you think back through the Old Testament, and you see all the feast of Israel, you see the certain days of celebration. Many times those feasts and certain days, they were days for them to stop. There were certain things that needed to be prepared the day before so that they could enjoy. But there's a lot of vacation time, if you will, in the Old Testament that was given by God, and some of it required by God, so that they could stop and remember, so they could stop and celebrate where God had brought them from, so that they could stop the normal ebb and flow of life. And there was certain healing, there's certain refreshing in that, there's certain spiritual life in that. God saw the benefit and the need for that. And we see that as you think back through the Old Testament. Just think about all the vacation time that Israel got in comparison to our culture. And I understand we're not bound by the Jewish law. I understand that, and I'm not teaching that in this, but I'm trying to draw a principle in our lives, because this is what I see. I see people today that are completely exhausted. I see people today that are busy in church. They're doing great things. They love God, but they're just spiritually malnourished. And the reason being is there's not these disciplines to cut through the busyness. The culture of our world is merging in on believers' lives. The culture of our world is merging in on the church. And we find ourselves today so busy, so overtaxed, so drawn out, so many distractions, so much going on that we can't be still and sit with God. We've tried to talk about that silence and solitude last week. I'll finish this off on this episode, and we'll jump into some more practical side of it, if you will, on Thursday. So please join with us on that episode. But before we jump off, it's interesting to note that on the creation week, God blessed 3 things. So God creates, He creates in 6 days, and He blessed the animal kingdom and told them to be fruitful and multiply. Then it goes on to say He blessed humanity or man, and for them to be fruitful and multiply. And then it's very interesting that God blessed the Sabbath day, the 7th day, the day of rest. It's interesting that those are the 3 things that God blessed. So we understand Him blessing the animal kingdom brought forth life. We understand Him blessing humanity, Adam and Eve, and you and I, brings forth, for us to be fruitful and multiply, brings forth more life. So if He blessed the 7th day, that day of rest and worship, and if it is utilized or practiced as God initially intended to, it will do what? It will bring forth life. It will be fruitful and help us to multiply. But so many of us are going through life with hardly any margin, with hardly any energy, with hardly any focus. We're exhausted. We're taken, just drawn in so many different ways, so many different directions. And we've said so much of it is not bad. Many of it is good. And some of us are working so hard for Jesus that we're not healthy people mentally. We're not healthy people physically. We're not healthy people spiritually. And so if you and I can grab a hold of the principle here and not some checklist of do's and don'ts and rules, and we want to have something over our shoulder, but if we can understand truly what this 7th day is, this Sabbath, this Sunday, day of rest, what it truly is, I believe it can transform our mind, our body, our spirit, and our soul. Join with us on Thursday as we continue this conversation on the Sabbath. Thank you for taking the time to listen. If this podcast has been helpful to you, please share it with a friend or subscribe to stay up to date on the latest episodes. You can connect with Collegians for Christ online for more information and resources at cfccampusministry.com.